March 14, 1942. Tulagi, Solomon Islands. The sun had barely pierced the horizon when Sergeant Hiroshi Tanaka made his morning rounds along the wooden palisade that encircled the Japanese garrison. Tulagi, seized barely a month prior during the initial phase of the Pacific Campaign, had been transformed into a defensive outpost, its beaches scarred with anti-landing obstacles and its jungle fringes patrolled by vigilant sentries. Life within the garrison had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Dawn inspections, weapons maintenance, drills, and long hours of monotony broken only by the occasional rumble of distant artillery or reconnaissance aircraft. Tanaka, 32, a veteran of Shanghai and the Philippines, moved with the practiced efficiency of a soldier accustomed to routine. He noted the peeling paint of the barracks, the makeshift repairs to the machine gun nests, and the new recruits struggling to carry supplies across the uneven terrain. Morale was moderate, supplies were adequate, but the men were tense, wary of the increasing chatter about American raids on outlying islands. Japanese intelligence underestimated the extent of Allied capabilities in the region. Reports suggested American operations were concentrated elsewhere, on Guadalcanal, on the distant New Guinea front, but Tulagi remained convinced it was safe. Meanwhile, across the ocean, a different rhythm unfolded. A small contingent of United States Marine raiders trained at Camp Elliott in San Diego and recently redeployed to Espiritu Santo, prepared for an operation that would disrupt Japanese positions in the Solomons. Lieutenant Colonel Evans Carlson, commander of the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion, reviewed maps and intelligence briefings in a dimly lit command tent. His officers huddled around, tracing paths through dense jungle terrain, calculating tide tables for amphibious insertion, and examining captured Japanese documents that detailed troop positions, defensive emplacements, and patrol schedules. Carlson's men were young but disciplined, chosen for their physical endurance, combat experience, and capacity for operating in small, self-sufficient teams. Among them, Private First Class James McAllister checked his Johnson LMG for the 3rd time that morning. The weapon, lightweight and semi-automatic, offered rapid-fire capabilities that could provide suppressive fire without the cumbersome setup of heavier machine guns. McAllister had trained extensively with it, familiar with the recoil, the feed mechanism, and the weight distribution across his shoulder. He understood that in the dense jungles of Tulagi, the Johnson would be his primary advantage, a weapon that could transform a firefight from desperate struggle to tactical control in moments. Back within the Japanese camp, Tanaka and his men inspected the barbed wire and bamboo reinforcements along the shoreline. They anticipated a potential landing, but their training emphasized static defense. Patrols were scheduled, but sentries were spaced to cover broad sectors rather than concentrated approaches. The Japanese infantry believed their position was secure. They had never faced raiding forces as specialized or flexible as the Marines poised for Tulagi. As the sun climbed, mist lifted from the jungle canopy, revealing the interwoven network of foxholes, supply caches, and hidden paths. Both sides remained unaware of the proximity of the other. The Marines were within striking distance, navigating reef and tide channels, guided by intelligence and stealth. Japanese soldiers continued their routine inspections, unaware that the first light of day would bring the roar of gunfire and the crack of Johnson LMG rounds that would shatter the illusion of security. By mid-morning, Tulagi's garrison remained orderly, disciplined, confident in the strength of its defenses. Yet somewhere within the jungle beyond the shoreline, shadows moved, silent, patient, and deadly, ready to exploit every weakness in the enemy's perception. The stage was set. The Japanese infantry trained for conventional defense had no expectation of the speed, coordination, or firepower that awaited them. Tulagi's morning calm was a thin veil soon to be torn by the roar of battle that would forever mark the introduction of Marine raiders and their Johnson light machine guns into the annals of Pacific combat. March 14, 1942. Late morning. The waters surrounding Tulagi shimmered under the tropical sun, calm and deceptive. From the cover of the northern reef, a small flotilla of Higgins boats and rubber landing craft approached, carrying the men of Carlson's 2nd Marine Raider Battalion. The operation had been meticulously planned, timing with tides, coordination of landing points, and silent navigation through channels charted from aerial reconnaissance and captured Japanese maps. The Marines moved with disciplined silence, aware that discovery even minutes before the assault could compromise the mission. Lieutenant Colonel Carlson observed through a pair of field binoculars, noting the subtle currents and the shadows of coral reefs beneath the waterline. He calculated the landing trajectory with precision. One misstep could strand a craft on hidden shoals or expose Marines to machine gun fire. Each man carried limited supplies, rations, and specialized equipment. Most importantly, each was armed with a Johnson light machine gun or a Browning automatic rifle, light, portable, and capable of providing suppressive fire in dense jungle terrain. Intelligence briefings emphasized the importance of firepower over brute force. The mission's success depended on speed, surprise, and precision rather than sheer numbers. Private First Class James McAllister checked the sling of his Johnson LMG, checking the drum magazine, ensuring rounds were seated correctly. The weapon's semi-automatic mechanism offered a rate of fire of roughly 500 rounds per minute, slower than a full automatic, but sufficient for disciplined bursts. In the jungle, where line of sight was limited and the enemy could emerge from any direction, control was as critical as volume. McAllister whispered a short prayer to himself, a personal habit before every engagement. Around him, his comrades maintained the same quiet focus, muscles coiled, senses heightened, aware that seconds would soon decide life or death. Meanwhile, on the northern edge of the Japanese garrison, sentries paced their posts, occasionally glancing over the water. Lieutenant Tanaka's men had been trained to spot small craft, but Tulagi's northern approach was poorly observed. Patrols were sporadic, and the dense reef made distant vessels difficult to detect. Tanaka's confidence in the static defenses of his position created a dangerous blind spot. No patrol had reported unusual movement that morning, and the Marines' approach remained undetected. As the landing craft neared the shore, the water dropped to ankle depth over jagged coral. Marines disembarked silently, stepping carefully to avoid the reefs that could damage feet or weapons. Within minutes, the raiding party moved inland, adopting wedge formations to maximize coverage while maintaining stealth. The jungle closed around them, dense with pandanus palms, ferns, and vines. Every sound was amplified: the snapping of a twig underfoot, the distant caw of a seabird, the rush of the tide against the reef. Carlson signaled with subtle hand gestures. The men melted into the shadows, rifles and Johnson LMGs poised for immediate action. Japanese sentries remained unaware, focused on distant patrols and the routine inspections of their positions. Their training had prepared them for conventional assaults, not small, agile raiding parties armed with rapid-fire light machine guns capable of pinning squads before they could respond. The element of surprise, the Marines' greatest weapon, remained intact. By late morning, the raiders had secured initial observation points along the edge of the garrison. Through binoculars, Carlson observed the sentries moving along their expected patterns, oblivious to the shadowed figures threading through the undergrowth mere meters away. The first contact, when it came, would be sudden and overwhelming, leveraging the Johnson LMG's suppressive fire to disorient and dominate. Tulagi remained calm on the surface, a garrison confident in its defenses. Yet within the dense jungle, a deadly force advanced silently, preparing to turn that confidence into chaos. Every step taken by the raiders brought them closer to the first encounter, closer to shattering the illusion of security that the Japanese infantry had relied upon. The stage for the confrontation had been set, and the calm before the storm was about to end. March 14, 1942, midday. The Marines had moved within a few hundred meters of the Japanese defensive perimeter when the first accidental noise shattered the jungle's deceptive calm, a fallen branch under the boot of Private McAllister. The sound, barely audible to human ears over the crashing surf, reached the sharp senses of a Japanese sentry positioned near a narrow clearing. Sergeant Tanaka froze, hand hovering above the grip of his Type 96 light machine gun. His eyes narrowed, scanning the undergrowth for movement, expecting perhaps a stray animal or a scout miscalculating his route. Instead, he glimpsed shadows flitting through the dense foliage. Carlson's raiders had closed to assault range, adopting suppressive positions. From the underbrush, bursts from the Johnson LMG erupted with controlled ferocity, sending a volley of .30 caliber rounds into the Japanese positions. The semi-automatic weapon, lighter and more maneuverable than the heavier Type 92 machine guns of the garrison, allowed Marines to fire while advancing, pinning defenders before they could organize. The Japanese infantry, trained for defensive engagements against conventional attacks, hesitated, startled by both the rapidity and precision of the assault. Lieutenant Colonel Carlson had split his force into small flanking units. One squad advanced along a concealed jungle path to the east, while another, led by Sergeant Anthony Tony Delgado, circled toward the southern approach of the garrison. The Johnson LMGs provided the critical firepower, suppressing enemy riflemen and forcing them into cover. Japanese soldiers fired sporadically, their volleys largely ineffective against the dispersed and mobile raiders. Tanaka's men attempted to regroup, shouting commands, but the suddenness and intensity of the attack caused confusion. Private McAllister's unit advanced along the central trail, with Johnson LMG ready on his shoulder, scanning for movement. He fired controlled bursts, targeting foxholes and defensive emplacements. The noise of gunfire echoed through the canopy, punctuated by the sharp cracks of Japanese rifles returning fire. Marines crouched behind ferns and tree trunks, exploiting every natural obstacle, while Japanese infantry, unprepared for the speed and firepower of the assault, faltered. Casualties began to mount on both sides. Japanese soldiers who tried to flee into the open jungle were cut down by disciplined bursts from the Johnsons and Browning automatic rifles. The Marines, trained to exploit surprise, moved rapidly from cover to cover, clearing bunkers and trenches with grenades and short-range rifle fire. Tanaka's attempt to organize a counterattack failed. His officers struggled to issue orders as the line of sight was compromised by the dense foliage and the sudden and overwhelming firepower. Amid the chaos, communication became critical. Carlson's hand signals and whispered commands ensured that the raiders maintained cohesion despite heavy resistance. The flanking units had reached key positions along the perimeter, effectively encircling small pockets of Japanese troops. The raiders used terrain and jungle density to their advantage, leveraging Johnson LMGs to keep defenders suppressed while demolition teams moved to destroy communication posts and ammunition caches. By mid-afternoon, the Japanese garrison was disoriented and scattered. Tanaka attempted to rally his men at a central trench, but the concentrated fire from the Marine raiders, combined with the psychological shock of the sudden assault, forced a retreat into secondary defensive positions. Survivors later recalled the sheer speed of the attack, describing it as a blur of disciplined Marines, moving shadows, and relentless gunfire. The first contact had decisively demonstrated the advantage of the Johnson LMG in jungle raiding operations: mobility, firepower, and shock effect. The jungle, once calm and seemingly secure, was now a theater of chaos. Bodies lay across trails, smoldering cigarette ashes scattered, rifles abandoned. For the Japanese infantry, the attack had been a brutal revelation. The raiders' tactics, weaponry, and coordination had shattered expectations, leaving Tulagi's garrison reeling. The stage for the confrontation had been set, and the calm before the storm was about to end. March 14, 1942, early afternoon. With the first contact behind them, Carlson's Marine raiders pressed deeper into the heart of the Tulagi garrison. The dense jungle, once an obstacle, became an ally, providing cover as the Marines moved through narrow trails and overgrown embankments. The Japanese defenders, disoriented and suppressed, had fallen back to secondary positions, leaving gaps that the raiders exploited with calculated precision.
Sergeant Anthony Delgado led a small team along a concealed path toward the garrison's communication post. The building, a corrugated metal structure on the edge of the central compound, housed radios and signal equipment critical to Japanese coordination. Intelligence indicated it contained enough supplies to sustain operations for weeks. Delgado signaled his team to spread out, positioning Johnson LMGs at the tree line to provide suppressive fire if the defenders regrouped. Private McAllister, crouched behind a thick pandanus palm, ran controlled bursts of fire from his Johnson LMG across the nearest trench. Each burst pinned down Japanese riflemen, preventing them from reinforcing the communication post. The light machine gun's mobility allowed McAllister to fire while adjusting position, a capability the heavier Type 92 had lacked and one that gave the raiders a decisive advantage. Japanese soldiers, trained for static defense and massed assaults, found themselves unable to respond effectively to the fast-moving, precise fire. Delgado's team reached the radio building without incident. Explosives were carefully emplaced on the main transmitters and antenna supports. Corporal James Whitaker double-checked the timing mechanisms, ensuring the detonation would occur after the raiders had withdrawn to a safe distance. The demolition team moved silently, every action rehearsed in training exercises, minimizing noise and leaving no trace of their approach. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the garrison, other raider teams targeted ammunition dumps and supply caches. Johnson LMGs covered open areas, suppressing any Japanese attempts to interfere. Marines moved in short, disciplined bounds, using hand signals and whispered commands to maintain coordination. The effect on the Japanese defenders was immediate. Squads that attempted to reposition were met with bursts of gunfire, forcing them to scatter or remain under cover. Reports from captured post-war testimonies indicated that many Japanese soldiers believed they were facing a force much larger than the raiders' actual numbers. As the explosives were set, Delgado signaled a final sweep through the perimeter. The raiders checked for stragglers, ensured no booby traps had been triggered, and confirmed all demolitions were ready. Then, with a synchronized countdown, the charges detonated. The radio building erupted in fire and smoke, the antenna collapsing in a twisted heap. Ammunition stores ignited, sending showers of sparks into the canopy above. The explosions echoed through the jungle, disorienting remaining Japanese troops and sending birds fleeing in every direction. Amid the chaos, Carlson's raiders maintained their composure. The plan required them to hold positions only long enough to complete sabotage before withdrawing to extraction points. Suppressive fire from Johnson LMGs prevented the Japanese from mounting an effective counterattack, while raiders moved from cover to cover, gathering intelligence documents and capturing prisoners where possible. By late afternoon, Tulagi's garrison was fragmented. Communication was disrupted, supply lines destroyed, and Japanese morale shattered. Sergeant Tanaka regrouped a handful of soldiers in a jungle clearing near the southern perimeter. Their numbers had been halved, and morale was low. The suddenness and ferocity of the Marine raiders' assault had shattered their confidence. Still, duty demanded resistance. With trembling hands and hastily issued commands, Tanaka ordered a counterattack to reclaim key positions and restore order. The raiders, positioned along the jungle trails and behind natural cover, detected the Japanese maneuver almost immediately. Lieutenant Colonel Carlson had anticipated such a reaction. He signaled his teams to prepare defensive positions while maintaining mobility. Johnson LMGs were already emplaced to cover the most likely avenues of approach. Their lightweight and semi-automatic fire capability allowed the Marines to pivot and suppress enemy advances while remaining agile in the dense undergrowth. As the first wave of Japanese soldiers emerged from the tree line, shouting in unison and waving rifles overhead, they were met with a hail of precise bursts from the Johnsons. Private McAllister adjusted his stance, firing controlled bursts aimed at the advancing squad leaders and machine gun nests. Each burst pinned down Japanese riflemen, preventing them from reinforcing the communication post. The light machine gun's mobility allowed McAllister to fire while adjusting position, a capability the heavier Type 92 had lacked, and one that gave the Raiders a decisive advantage. Japanese soldiers, trained for static defense and massed assaults, found themselves unable to respond effectively to the fast-moving, precise fire. Sergeant Delgado's team moved along a concealed path to intercept another Japanese squad attempting to envelop the Raiders' eastern position. The crossfire caused disarray. Japanese soldiers, trained for frontal assaults and massed formations, struggled to adapt to an opponent capable of firing from multiple directions simultaneously. Bursts from Johnson LMGs shredded defensive formations, cutting off avenues of escape and disorienting survivors. One Japanese officer later recounted the confusion, stating that the Raiders seemed to appear out of nowhere, their fire continuous and unrelenting. Despite the intensity of the assault, the Japanese persisted, determined to reclaim lost ground. They lobbed grenades into foliage, hoping to flush out hidden Marines, and attempted concentrated charges along narrow trails. However, Carlson's Raiders had prepared for this.
Sergeant Anthony Delgado led a small team along a concealed path toward the garrison's communication post. The building, a corrugated metal structure on the edge of the central compound, housed radios and signal equipment critical to Japanese coordination. Intelligence indicated it contained enough supplies to sustain operations for weeks. Delgado signaled his team to spread out, positioning Johnson LMGs at the tree line to provide suppressive fire if the defenders regrouped. Private McAllister, crouched behind a thick pandanus palm, ran controlled bursts of fire from his Johnson LMG across the nearest trench. Each burst pinned down Japanese riflemen, preventing them from reinforcing the communication post. The light machine gun's mobility allowed McAllister to fire while adjusting position, a capability the heavier Type 92 had lacked, and one that gave the Raiders a decisive advantage. Japanese soldiers, trained for static defense and massed assaults, found themselves unable to respond effectively to the fast-moving, precise fire. Delgado's team reached the radio building without incident. Explosives were carefully emplaced on the main transmitters and antenna supports. Corporal James Whitaker double-checked the timing mechanisms, ensuring the detonation would occur after the Raiders had withdrawn to a safe distance. The demolition team moved silently, every action rehearsed in training exercises, minimizing noise and leaving no trace of their approach. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the garrison, other Raider teams targeted ammunition dumps and supply caches. Johnson LMGs covered open areas, suppressing any Japanese attempts to interfere. Marines moved in short, disciplined bounds, using hand signals and whispered commands to maintain coordination. The effect on the Japanese defenders was immediate. Squads that attempted to reposition were met with bursts of gunfire, forcing them to scatter or remain under cover. Reports from captured post-war testimonies indicated that many Japanese soldiers believed they were facing a force much larger than the Raiders' actual numbers. As the explosives were set, Delgado signaled a final sweep through the perimeter. The Raiders checked for stragglers, ensured no booby traps had been triggered, and confirmed all demolitions were ready. Then, with a synchronized countdown, the charges detonated. The radio building erupted in fire and smoke, the antenna collapsing in a twisted heap. Ammunition stores ignited, sending showers of sparks into the canopy above. The explosions echoed through the jungle, disorienting remaining Japanese troops and sending birds fleeing in every direction. Amid the chaos, Carlson's Raiders maintained their composure. The plan required them to hold positions only long enough to complete sabotage before withdrawing to extraction points.
Suppressive fire from Johnson LMGs prevented the Japanese from mounting an effective counterattack, while raiders moved from cover to cover, gathering intelligence documents and capturing prisoners where possible. By late afternoon, Tulagi's garrison was fragmented, communication was disrupted, supply lines destroyed, and Japanese morale shattered. Sergeant Tanaka regrouped a handful of soldiers in a jungle clearing near the southern perimeter. Their numbers had been halved, and morale was low. The suddenness and ferocity of the Marine raider assault had shattered their confidence. Still, duty demanded resistance. With trembling hands and hastily issued commands, Tanaka ordered a counterattack to reclaim key positions and restore order. The raiders, positioned along the jungle trails and behind natural cover, detected the Japanese maneuver almost immediately. Lieutenant Colonel Carlson had anticipated such a reaction. He signaled his teams to prepare defensive positions while maintaining mobility. Johnson LMGs were already emplaced to cover the most likely avenues of approach. Their lightweight and semi-automatic fire capability allowed the Marines to pivot and suppress enemy advances while remaining agile in the dense undergrowth. As the first wave of Japanese soldiers emerged from the tree line, shouting in unison and waving rifles overhead, they were met with a hail of precise bursts from the Johnsons. Private McAllister adjusted his stance, firing controlled bursts aimed at advancing squad leaders and machine gun nests. Each burst pinned down Japanese riflemen, preventing them from reinforcing the communication post. The light machine gun's mobility allowed McAllister to fire while adjusting position, a capability the heavier Type 92 had lacked. Sergeant Delgado's flanking unit moved along a concealed path to intercept another Japanese squad attempting to envelop the raiders' eastern position. The crossfire caused disarray. Japanese soldiers, trained for frontal assaults and massed formations, struggled to adapt to an opponent capable of firing from multiple directions simultaneously. Bursts from Johnson LMGs shredded defensive formations, cutting off avenues of escape and disorienting survivors. One Japanese officer later recounted the confusion, stating that the raiders seemed to appear out of nowhere, their fire continuous and unrelenting. Despite the intensity of the assault, the Japanese persisted, determined to reclaim lost ground. They lobbed grenades into foliage, hoping to flush out hidden Marines, and attempted concentrated charges along narrow trails. Carlson's raiders, however, had prepared for this
scenario. Using terrain and vegetation, they funneled Japanese advances into kill zones covered by overlapping fields of fire. The combination of suppressive fire, flanking maneuvers, and pre-planned escape routes ensured minimal Marine casualties while maximizing pressure on the enemy. Casualties mounted among Japanese ranks. Soldiers who attempted to regroup were quickly cut down by coordinated bursts from Johnson LMGs and supporting riflemen. Attempts to rally at secondary defensive positions failed repeatedly, as Marines moved swiftly, closing distances with controlled fire, grenades, and hand signals. Within an hour, the counterattack had collapsed. Survivors retreated into the jungle, leaving behind weapons, supplies, and the wounded. By late afternoon, Tulagi's garrison was fragmented and demoralized. Carlson signaled a temporary halt to assess positions and resupply ammunition from caches brought ashore for the operation. Despite exhaustion, the raiders remained alert, aware that reinforcements could arrive or that scattered Japanese units might attempt ambushes during extraction. Tanaka, surveying the aftermath, recognized the devastating effectiveness of the Johnson LMGs and the raiders' tactical coordination. Japanese doctrine, built around defensive static positions and disciplined massed formations, had proven ill-suited to counter agile, lightly armed raiding forces. The first decisive engagement had concluded. The raiders had not only repelled the counterattack, but had further solidified control over key areas of the garrison. For the Marines, this was more than a victory in combat. It was validation of training, weapons, and strategy. For the Japanese infantry, it was a harsh lesson in the evolving nature of modern warfare in the Pacific. Speed, firepower, and surprise could overwhelm even the most disciplined defenders. March 14, 1942, late afternoon. With the Japanese counterattack repelled, Carlson's Marine raiders turned their attention to consolidating control over Tulagi's garrison. Smoke still drifted from the demolished radio building, mingling with the humid jungle air, carrying the faint scent of charred wood and scorched metal. The raiders moved methodically,
checking the perimeters, securing supply caches, and ensuring that no pockets of resistance remained in the undergrowth. Lieutenant Colonel Carlson split his battalion into small teams for the final phase of the operation. One squad, led by Sergeant Delgado, swept through the southern trenches to secure ammunition dumps, while another team under Lieutenant James Monroe scoured the northern compound for intelligence documents. The Johnson LMGs remained central to these maneuvers, their suppressive fire ensuring that any lingering defenders could be contained without direct engagement. The weapon's semi-automatic rate of fire, portability, and accuracy allowed the raiders to maintain control over open spaces and choke points while simultaneously advancing through dense foliage. Private McAllister, positioned atop a fallen log, swept the clearing with his Johnson LMG, noting movement in a partially camouflaged trench. A small group of Japanese soldiers, attempting to regroup, froze under his disciplined bursts. They surrendered quickly when confronted with the overwhelming firepower and the precision of the Marines' positions. Intelligence officers moved in to interrogate, gathering immediate tactical information about remaining enemy forces, fortifications, and communications. These captures would prove critical for both the current operation and future raids in the Solomons. Elsewhere, demolition teams moved through the garrison, systematically destroying remaining ammunition, medical supplies, and any materials that could be used by the Japanese to reconstitute their defense. Explosives were placed carefully to prevent unnecessary casualties while ensuring that structures were rendered unusable. Carlson monitored progress through hand signals, radio silence maintained to avoid alerting distant enemy units. Every action was synchronized, reflecting weeks of training and careful planning. The raiders also focused on intelligence collection. Officers retrieved maps, signal codes, and operational notes from abandoned positions. Documents detailing patrol routes, supply inventories, and garrison routines were photographed or collected for transport back to Allied headquarters. This information would provide invaluable insight into Japanese defensive practices on Tulagi and surrounding islands, helping to shape future amphibious operations. Despite the intensity of the raid, casualties among the Marines were minimal. The careful use of terrain, disciplined fire from Johnson LMGs, and small unit tactics ensured that each engagement favored the raiders. Japanese forces, demoralized and scattered, posed little threat during the final consolidation. By dusk, Carlson called a halt to operations and established temporary defensive positions near the landing zones. The raiders had completed the mission's objectives: sabotage, intelligence gathering, and battlefield control. As night fell, the men regrouped, tending to minor wounds and preparing for extraction. Tulagi, once a secure Japanese outpost, now lay under Allied control, its garrison disrupted and its strategic value leveraged by a small, highly trained force. The operation demonstrated a crucial lesson in modern warfare. Mobility, firepower, and precision could achieve objectives that traditional massed assaults could not. The Marine raiders had proven that a disciplined, lightly armed force could neutralize a numerically superior opponent, leaving a lasting mark on the evolving Pacific campaign.
March 14, 1942, early evening. With Tulagi's garrison neutralized and all primary objectives achieved, Carlson's Marine raiders prepared for extraction. The operation had been a tactical success, but the challenges of withdrawal through jungle terrain, under the threat of scattered enemy forces, demanded vigilance. Each Marine checked equipment, secured ammunition, and ensured Johnson LMGs were ready for final suppressive actions if necessary. The landing zones had been scouted and marked earlier in the day. Carlson coordinated with the small flotilla of Higgins boats waiting offshore, timing the approach with the incoming tide. Extraction required silence, speed, and coordination. Any misstep could alert Japanese forces regrouping in the surrounding jungle or on adjacent beaches. The Marines moved in small groups, covering each other with bursts from Johnson LMGs to suppress potential enemy contact while advancing toward the shoreline. Private McAllister carried his Johnson LMG over his shoulder, the weapon still hot from sustained fire. The semi-automatic rounds, carefully controlled throughout the day, had dominated the battlefield, allowing small units to engage effectively while minimizing exposure. McAllister scanned the tree line for movement, aware that Japanese snipers or retreating soldiers could attempt last-minute harassment. The dense foliage masked the raiders' approach, but heightened vigilance remained crucial.
Sergeant Delgado led a team along the southern trail, sweeping for stragglers and wounded Japanese soldiers. Any contact was met with disciplined, coordinated fire, the Johnsons providing suppressive cover while Marines advanced methodically. The combination of mobility, tactical firepower, and small unit cohesion ensured that Japanese forces were unable to mount a serious counterattack during the withdrawal. For the Japanese survivors, the presence of raiders throughout the jungle created the impression of a larger, omnipresent force. As the Marines approached the northern landing zone, Carlson signaled the first extraction boat to move in. Marines boarded quickly, keeping low to avoid silhouetting themselves against the fading light. The Johnson LMGs remained trained on likely avenues of approach, ready to respond to any last-minute threats. The precision and speed of the operation allowed the raiders to load personnel, captured intelligence, and minimal casualties efficiently, completing the extraction without incident. During the final phase of withdrawal, Carlson allowed a brief pause for reflection. The operation had achieved its objectives. The Japanese garrison was disrupted, supply depots and communication lines destroyed, and intelligence secured for future campaigns. The psychological impact on the Japanese defenders had been profound, demonstrated by captured post-war testimonies describing fear, disorientation, and shock at the raiders' tactics. The Johnson LMGs, light, portable, and capable of controlled bursts, had been central to this success, demonstrating the tactical advantage of modern, agile firepower in jungle warfare. Marines on the boats exchanged quiet words, recounting key moments of the assault. Private McAllister reflected on the efficiency of the weapon he carried, noting how the Johnson allowed him to control entire sectors of fire while remaining mobile. Sergeant Delgado thought about the coordination required to maintain unit cohesion under continuous engagement. For every Marine, the operation reinforced lessons in discipline, adaptability, and the lethal effectiveness of small unit tactics against conventional forces. By nightfall, the raiders reached Espiritu Santo without encountering enemy reinforcements. Carlson debriefed his officers immediately, documenting enemy strength, casualty estimates, and captured materials. Reports would be forwarded to Allied command to inform future operations in the Solomon Islands. Tulagi had been neutralized, not by overwhelming numbers, but by precision, coordination, and superior firepower delivered by highly trained Marines equipped with Johnson LMGs. For the Japanese, Tulagi would remain a bitter lesson. Even a seemingly secure garrison could be shattered in hours by a small, mobile, and well-armed force. For the raiders, the operation became a benchmark of small unit effectiveness, reinforcing the growing belief in mobility, firepower, and psychological dominance as essential elements of Pacific combat. As the boats cut through the dark waters, the echoes of the day's assault lingered, a testament to the Marines' courage, skill, and the decisive impact of the Johnson light machine gun.
For the Japanese, Tulagi was a bitter lesson in underestimating an opponent. Sergeant Tanaka and his surviving men returned to scattered posts, their morale diminished. Japanese military assessments recognized the limitations of static defenses against agile raiding forces. Post-war interrogations recounted the shock, confusion, and fear experienced by defenders when faced with a unit that could traverse jungle paths silently, strike suddenly, and retreat without the need for reinforcement. The encounter forced a re-evaluation of defensive practices, signaling the growing threat of specialized Allied units across the Pacific. On Espiritu Santo, Carlson and his men reflected quietly on their experience. The operation had been brutal and exhausting, yet it had affirmed the raiders' training, cohesion, and discipline. Private McAllister, inspecting his Johnson LMG for maintenance, understood how a single weapon could alter the dynamics of combat. The psychological weight of the raid, the ability to dominate a larger force through mobility and firepower, left a lasting impression on every Marine present. Tulagi had proven that courage, skill, and preparation could multiply force effectiveness in ways conventional doctrine rarely anticipated. As the sun set over the Solomons, the legacy of Tulagi endured. The raid became emblematic of the Marine raiders' ethos, precision, surprise, and effectiveness over raw numbers. It marked a turning point in small unit tactics, the application of modern light machine guns, and the broader evolution of Allied strategies in the Pacific. Johnson LMGs, though often overlooked in favor of heavier weapons, had proven their worth in shaping battles and morale. Tulagi's jungle, once a site of fear and uncertainty, became a symbol of tactical innovation, the power of well-trained men with the right tools, and the enduring impact of courage and ingenuity in warfare. In the end, the story of Tulagi was not only one of victory, but of transformation. It demonstrated that even the smallest unit, wielding skill and technology with purpose, could change the course of a battle. The Japanese infantry, disciplined and brave, had underestimated the raiders, and in doing so, Tulagi had become a testament to the evolution of modern combat, the legacy of the Johnson LMG, and the indelible mark of Marines willing to confront the unexpected and seize victory from the jaws of conventional expectation.